An Arkansas couple is facing severe abuse allegations after a girl told her school counselor that she has been suffering from severe mistreatment for nearly 3 years. She said that 34-year-old Daniel Kaler was guilty of assaulting her from August of 2020 to March of 2023 and claimed that his wife, 28-year-old Annie Kaler, witnessed the abuse on at least 2 occasions. The victim accused the couple of forcing her to use drugs, including methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl, and of forcing her to take part in drug deals. She told her counselor that Annie had stabbed her in the neck with a fork one day out of dissatisfaction over how the dishes had been washed, and that the Kalers refused to take her to the hospital when she broke her leg. Additionally, the couple is accused of depriving the girl of food and water, limiting her nourishment to just 1 Pop-Tart and 1 glass of water per week. While the nature of the victim's relationship to the Kalers is unclear, Daniel reportedly threatened to kill the victim if she told anyone about the abuse. An investigation was launched after she came forward, and both Daniel and Annie were arrested on a slew of charges. Annie faces 1 count each of the introduction of a controlled substance into the body of another, endangering the welfare of a minor, 2nd-degree battery, terroristic threatening, and permitting the abuse of a child. She remains behind bars at the Benton County Detention Center, while Daniel is being held on charges of assault, endangering the welfare of a child, permitting the abuse of a child, and more. Number 34. David Laffer and Melinda Brady. A Long Island, New York community was left shaken by an unspeakable act of violence in June of 2011 when 33-year-old David Laffer entered a Suffolk County pharmacy and shot 4 people dead execution style. He stole a large amount of prescription drugs and left in a waiting getaway car driven by his wife, 29-year-old Melinda Brady. Included among the victims were 2 employees, 45-year-old Raymond Ferguson and teenager Jennifer Mia, and 2 customers, 71-year-old Brian Sheffield and 33-year-old mother of 2, Jamie Taketa. 3 days later, as many as 40 police officers descended on the couple's Medford residence, which was roughly a half-mile from the pharmacy. Laffer and Brady were apprehended in what was later described as a violent confrontation with law enforcement, and were both charged with a laundry list of crimes. In November of 2011, Laffer was sentenced to life without parole for 5 counts of murder, 1 for each victim plus 1 count for multiple victims, and 4 counts of first-degree criminal use of a firearm. He pleaded guilty to the charges, knowing that he would never be released from prison, and the judge requested that he be kept in solitary confinement while expressing doubts that the prison would actually accommodate the request. Brady pleaded guilty to first-degree robbery and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. She'll become eligible for parole in 2032 at the age of 50. Number 33. Derrick Stewart and Desirae McCants. In September of 2024, Escambia County Sheriff's deputies found a man lying on the front lawn of a Pensacola, Florida home with multiple gunshot wounds. Identified by law enforcement as Larry Spires III, he was pronounced dead at the scene. While investigating the case, police discovered that Spires had crossed paths with a friend who told him that his ex-girlfriend Desirae McCants was now dating a man named Derrick Stewart. Spires called McCants and they arranged for him to go to her house so they could have a conversation about the matter. Surveillance footage showed him standing near his vehicle and making a phone call at around 3 a.m. At the same time, a black sedan turned its headlights off and parked nearby. Someone exited from the passenger side and fired 3 gunshots as they walked towards Spires. The shooter then got back in the vehicle and fled the scene. Investigators traced the car to McCants, and a witness told police they had seen the car circling through the neighborhood prior to the shooting. Cell phone location data and other evidence led to the conclusion that McCants and her new boyfriend, Derrick Stewart, were responsible for the death of Spires. The 2 suspects were arrested on suspicion of homicide and are currently being detained at the Escambia County Jail. Number 32. Ashley Coleman and Hakeem Griffin-White in a broad daylight execution that was captured on video by onlookers. 19-year-old Drake Heiston, Dre Alex, was gunned down in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, Texas in March of 2017. He died en route to the hospital from blood loss caused by a gunshot wound to the leg. According to reports, a Dodge PT Cruiser pulled up to Alex as he strolled along the sidewalk. A man exited the passenger side of the vehicle, engaged in a brief confrontation with Alex, then shot him, got back in the car, and fled the scene. Using surveillance footage, police traced the PT Cruiser to a 27-year-old owner named Ashley Coleman. They found the car abandoned after seeing it pull away from the home of one of the woman's relatives. In the meantime, detectives uncovered an alarming rap video on social media, which was taken just moments before Alex was killed. In the clip, Coleman and local teenager Hakeem Griffin-White seemed to be making threats to kill someone. She had a much different demeanor after the murder, however, and denied that the car in the surveillance footage belonged to her. Griffin-White had befriended Coleman after taking an interest in her rap music, despite being 10 years younger than her. He had also been childhood friends with Alex, but the two had experienced a falling out by the time of the murder. During questioning, Griffin-White seemed like he was trying to downplay Coleman's role in the crime. Meanwhile, Coleman claimed that Griffin-White had recently become increasingly violent and controlling. But investigators didn't believe the woman, who they thought had come across as manipulative and eager to throw her accomplice under the bus. Records show that Coleman was convicted of murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. She's serving a 19-year sentence and will become eligible for parole in 2026, while Griffin-White was sentenced to 75 years behind bars. Number 31. Amanda Noverr and Adam Williams. 48-year-old James Butler and his wife, 46-year-old Michelle, vanished in October of 2019 while traveling from their home state of New Hampshire to Florida to sell Christmas trees. 11 days after family members reported them missing, the couple's bodies were found in shallow graves on South Padre Island in Texas. By then, the Butlers' pickup truck and camper had been tracked to a border crossing where they were seen crossing into Mexico. Police released surveillance images of the truck's occupants, who were later identified as 33-year-olds Adam Williams and Amanda Noverr. Relatives of the Butlers did not recognize the pair, who were from Utah. Further investigation revealed that on the day of the Butlers' murders, the suspects had stopped to scope out the camper. Williams told Noverr to go somewhere and return to the site later on. He then shot both victims in the head with a 9mm handgun, and Noverr helped him bury the bodies. Police traced the couple to a trailer park in the Mexican state of Jalisco, where Noverr willingly surrendered. She had recently told a friend that she wanted to leave Williams and had provided their location prior to law enforcement's arrival. Inside the camper, investigators found the murder weapon and DNA evidence connecting the suspects to the double homicide. Detectives determined that Noverr bought the gun that was used in the murder, but that she did not pull the trigger herself. Prosecutors agreed to a plea negotiation, and she received a 20-year sentence. After pleading guilty to first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, theft, and unlawful possession of a firearm, in November of 2021, Williams pleaded guilty to capital murder and other felony charges. In order to avoid the death penalty, he was sentenced to life without parole. Number 30. Timothy Creel and Alexis Davidson. Shortly before 11 p.m. on January 8th of 2025, Berkeley County Sheriff's deputies responded to a shooting in Ridgeville, South Carolina, where they found 36-year-old Jamal Edmondson suffering from multiple gunshot wounds inside a vehicle that had veered off the road. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators traced the crime to 26-year-olds Timothy John Creel and Alexis Dakota Davidson, who have been charged with murder. This wasn't Creel's first run-in with the law or his first time making news headlines. Back in 2020, local news outlets reported that he was wanted for multiple gun charges and failure to stop for law enforcement. Davidson was also a suspect in the previous case. Davidson is being held without bond at the Hill-Finkley Detention Center on a murder charge, while Creel is being detained on suspicion of murder, arson, third-degree assault, or battery by a mob, and participating in a riot by prisoners. Authorities have released limited details about the murder that the pair are accused of, citing the ongoing nature of the investigation. Number 29. Susan and Blane Barksdale. During the early morning hours of April 16, 2019, a Tucson, Arizona neighborhood was awakened by the sound of an explosion. The home of 72-year-old Air Force veteran Frank Bly was on fire, while the senior citizen himself was nowhere to be found. By the time firefighters extinguished the blaze, the home was completely destroyed. They found no trace of Bly inside the residence, and one of his vehicles was conspicuously absent from the property. Dozens of guns had been taken from Bly's safes, and the evidence revealed that the fire had been deliberately set. Investigators soon learned that Bly had recently been seen with his longtime friend, 58-year-old Susan Barksdale, who claimed to have no knowledge of Bly's whereabouts, and Susan's husband, Blane. The day after the fire, Bly's vehicle was found abandoned along a roadside 10 miles from his residence. It bore signs of foul play. including blood in the trunk, which turned up as a match to the missing man's DNA. While speaking with Susan's daughter, Jada, investigators learned that Bly had confronted Blane Barksdale about his alleged mistreatment toward her after receiving a suspiciously urgent phone call from her mother about the need to skip town. Jada believed Blane had taken Susan hostage and was extremely worried about her safety. Police paid a visit to the couple's home in northern Arizona and quickly discovered that they had gone on the run. Inside the residence, officers found cell phones containing incriminating evidence of the Barksdales' involvement in Bly's disappearance. Using this information, they identified Blane's nephew, Brent Mallard, as a third suspect. Mallard admitted to setting Bly's house on fire at his uncle's command, but denied any knowledge of a murder. Authorities launched a manhunt for the Barksdales, who were captured in New York State about a month later. Susan told police that Blane abused her and that he had murdered Bly during a confrontation over some of the victim's missing guns. While being transported back to Arizona, Susan and Blane managed to lock guards in the back of the vehicle. They fled to the state's northern region, where they were eventually recaptured as part of a plea agreement. Blane agreed to disclose the location of Bly's remains, which were found on a cliff in California's Salt River Canyon. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison for second-degree murder, while Susan Barksdale served 4 years in prison for manslaughter and was released in 2023. Brent Mallard pleaded guilty to arson and was sentenced to 7 years of probation. Number 28. Brinlee Denison and Nicholas Johnson. 29-year-old Sarah Maguire was bludgeoned to death with a crowbar inside her Tulsa, Oklahoma home on January 4, 2022. Officers discovered the bloody scene while performing a welfare check after Maguire failed to show up at her job. The victim's car was missing, and banking records showed that someone was using Maguire's bank card. Police tracked the purchases to a Whataburger restaurant in Arkansas, where they arrested 28-year-old Nicholas Johnson and 25-year-old Brinlee Denison on suspicion of first-degree murder and larceny of a vehicle. During questioning, the pair admitted to killing Maguire out of jealousy. Johnson said that he was in a relationship with Denison, who was also dating Maguire. He seemed jealous of the women's relationship but pointed the finger at Denison, claiming that she was the one who wanted Maguire dead and talked him into going along with a plan to kill her. Denison essentially claimed the opposite, telling investigators that Johnson had essentially held her captive. Surveillance footage of the young woman calmly waiting in the car while Johnson went into a Walmart store during their time on the run convinced detectives that Denison was likely a party to the crime, rather than an innocent bystander who was being taken against her will. Johnson pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life without parole, while Denison admitted to a reduced charge of accessory to murder and received a 20-year sentence. She'll be 42 years old when she becomes eligible for parole in 2039. Number 27. Nadya Swartz and Justin Hooker. After struggling with mental illness and substance abuse issues throughout much of his life, Kenneth Bunn of Whitfield County, Georgia, got sober during his 20s. In 2018, he met and began dating 18-year-old Nadya Swartz. He felt deeply connected to the young woman, but Swartz quickly grew tired of the relationship and broke up with Bunn after a few months of dating. Bunn pleaded with Swartz to give their relationship another chance, but she refused, while also continuing to talk to him regularly, leaving him hopeful that they would rekindle their romance. He was unaware that within weeks of their breakup, Swartz had started dating a new man, Justin Hooker. It wasn't long before Hooker grew to despise Bunn, and his anger eventually escalated into threats against the young man's life. On a March evening in 2020, Bunn left the home he shared with his grandmother to walk to the store. He never returned, and his grandmother reported him missing the following morning. That same day, a 911 caller reported the discovery of human remains along the Conestoga River in Murray County. The body belonged to Bunn, who had been shot 3 times in the head and once in the torso. Bunn's grandmother told investigators that Swartz had shown up at her home the previous night looking for her grandson. Surveillance footage from a local gas station showed Bunn talking to Swartz and leaving in her car, but there wasn't enough evidence to make any arrests until law enforcement received a call from a man who had sold Justin Hooker a gun prior to Bunn's murder. The seller claimed that Hooker had admitted to using the gun to kill Bunn after being brought back in for questioning. Swartz claimed that Bunn had tried to strangle her and that Hooker had shot him to protect her, but Bunn had no history of violence and Swartz bore no signs of injury. Police suspected that she had manipulated Hooker into killing Bunn, and both suspects ultimately pleaded guilty to murder. They'll both be 50 years old when they become eligible for parole in 2050. Number 26. Reyna Castellanos and Alfredo Castellanos-Rosales. On April 25, 2023, 23-year-old Jordan Beardshire was stabbed to death inside her apartment in Dakota Dunes, South Dakota. Upon discovering her body the following day, police were quick to realize that her young son and her cell phone were missing. The boy was located in the safe care of his grandmother, and Beardshire's phone was found in a wooded area 2 days after the murder. Suspicion quickly fell on the father of Beardshire's child, 38-year-old Alfredo Castellanos-Rosales, who had fled to Mexico shortly after the crime. Evidence showed that he had gone to the victim's apartment just minutes before her phone activity permanently stopped. Beardshire's deceased body was dressed in the same outfit she was wearing in her last Snapchat photo, further helping investigators narrow down the timeline surrounding her death. 2 days after the murder, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Castellanos-Rosales on charges of first-degree murder, contributing to the neglect of a child, and contributing to the abuse of a child. A few weeks later, he was captured and extradited to South Dakota, where he pleaded not guilty to the charges. Alfredo's wife, Reyna Castellanos, was charged with being an accessory to murder, along with 2 misdemeanors for helping her husband flee to Mexico and agreeing to sell their home as a way to get cash for him. After repeated delays, both suspects are scheduled to go to trial in June of 2025. Number 25. Jennifer Bailey and Paul Henson. When 43-year-old mother of 2, Susan Bailey, failed to show up at her job in Roanoke, Texas, one day in September 2008. Her co-workers grew concerned and called her mother, who called the police after being unable to locate her daughter or grandchildren. Susan's car was missing, but there were no signs of forced entry or foul play, so officers left without going inside. 2 days later, a police officer in Yankton, South Dakota, pulled over a car with Texas license plates, which traced back to Susan Bailey. Inside the vehicle were Susan's daughter and son, Jennifer and David Bailey, and Jennifer's boyfriend, Paul Henson. The officer notified Roanoke police of the situation, which gave law enforcement probable cause to forcibly enter Susan's home. Inside the residence, they found Susan's body. Someone had slashed her throat, bludgeoned her with a baseball bat, and stabbed her repeatedly. Susan had disapproved of Jennifer's relationship with Henson and had recently learned that the two had continued to see each other in secret after Jennifer claimed she had ended the relationship. After the murder, investigators crossed paths with another teen girl who was in juvenile detention for recently stabbing her own mother. She claimed that she, Jennifer, and Henson were a throuple, and they had planned to kill their parents, run away to Canada together, and start a commune. Jennifer Bailey, David Bailey, and Paul Henson were all charged with Susan's murder and pleaded guilty in 2009. Jennifer Bailey and Paul Henson were sentenced to 60 years with the possibility of parole starting in 2038, while David Bailey received a 26-year sentence. He's scheduled to be released in 2034 at the age of 40. Number 24. Alison Martin and Justin Terpstra. On a November afternoon in 2009, police were called to a forest clearing in South Haven, Michigan, where they found a wrecked car and a burned body. The victim's hands had been duct taped behind their back, and there was duct tape around the victim's head and mouth. Identified as 25-year-old Brandon Silverlight, he had been stabbed multiple times and bludgeoned in the head, and there was carbon monoxide in his lungs, indicating that he was still alive when he was set on fire. Silverlight's wife, Jennifer, told police that they were in an open relationship. He was seeing a 22-year-old woman named Alison Martin, who had insisted on meeting up on the night he was last seen alive. His body had been found less than a half mile from a trailer owned by Martin's family, where officers discovered more duct tape and signs of a struggle. When questioned by police, Martin denied seeing Silverlight any time recently. She was engaged to 24-year-old Terpstra, who was on parole after serving time for a home invasion charge, and investigators were able to place both suspects at the crime scene. Upon being confronted with the evidence, Terpstra confessed to killing Silverlight, claiming that the victim had been harassing Martin. In reality, Silverlight had filed a stalking complaint against Martin, who had previously admitted to being obsessed with her married lover. Martin had become jealous after learning that Silverlight's wife was pregnant with their first child. And while Terpstra initially tried to take the fall for the crime, he eventually admitted that Martin participated in the murder. They were both found guilty of the crime and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Number 23. Chazz Johnson and Erica Coleman. Intent on seeking revenge for a previous altercation, upstate New York couple Chazz Johnson and Erica Coleman fatally ambushed a man outside his Plattsburgh apartment one morning in September of 2024. 31-year-old corrections officer Marcus Dixon exited the building at 2 in the morning and was shot 3 times in the chest by one of his assailants. He was rushed to the hospital where he succumbed to his injuries, and police arrested 24-year-old Johnson and 21-year-old Coleman the following week. Johnson was initially charged with second-degree murder, conspiracy, and criminal possession of a weapon, while Coleman faced conspiracy and weapon possession charges. In April of 2025, Johnson pleaded guilty as charged. He's currently awaiting sentencing, which is scheduled for July, and is facing up to life in prison. Coleman pleaded guilty to conspiracy and is also awaiting sentencing. She faces up to 6 years in prison. Number 22. Thadeshia Clark and Omar Xavier. In May of 2016, 35-year-old hairdresser Howard Sewell made plans to celebrate his birthday with a woman he met online. He was never seen or heard from again. When he failed to show up for work a few days later and wasn't answering his phone, his workplace called his mother, who was also unable to reach her son. Less than a week later, a man discovered Sewell's body behind an auto body shop in Spaulding County while walking his dog. Sewell had been shot at least 4 times, wrapped in a tarp and set on fire. The already disturbing case took an eerie turn when Sewell's mother received an anonymous phone call from a woman claiming that his birthday date had been a robbery setup. Acting on the information, investigators discovered that police had responded to a call of shots fired at an apartment on the same day they believed Sewell was killed. Officers were unable to trace the sound of the noise and left the scene. Later that night, 21-year-old Omar Xavier showed up at a hospital in Marietta with bullet wounds to the arm and leg. He was accompanied by his friend, Chris Hanna, and his girlfriend, 20-year-old Thadeshia Clark. Police obtained a warrant to search Hannah's apartment and found it nearly completely empty, but there were clear signs of foul play. There were some shell casings on the floor, bullets embedded in the wall, and a piano bench covered in blood, which turned up as a match to Sewell. The residence smelled strongly of cleaning materials. Xavier and Clark began dating after Clark allowed Xavier to sleep on her couch when he was homeless. After Sewell's murder, Hanna told investigators that he had only discovered Sewell's body after dropping Xavier off at the hospital. He claimed that Clark wanted to practice embalming the remains and that he helped her and Xavier dispose of the body because he was scared for his safety. Hanna was found guilty of concealing the death and will be paroled from prison in 2026 after serving 8 years of his 15-year sentence behind bars. Clark confessed to luring Sewell to the shooting, telling police that he had fought back harder than anyone had expected when he was ordered to hand his money over. She and Xavier both pleaded guilty to malice murder and felony murder and were sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Number 21. Sonia Weidenfelder and Rick Spaulding. In November of 2016, 39-year-old mother of 2, Deborah Morgan, was shot dead in her sleep at her Broken Arrow, Oklahoma home. Police received a 911 call from her neighbor after Morgan's young son discovered her body and ran next door for help. At the time, Morgan was entangled in a contentious child custody battle with her ex-husband, Rick Spaulding, over their son. This naturally made Spaulding and his wife, Sonia Weidenfelder, persons of interest in the case. Prior to her murder, Morgan had made ominous comments to friends and co-workers, including to investigate Spaulding if she ended up dead. Spaulding had reportedly told a different ex-wife that he wanted to tamper with Morgan's brake lines or harm her with explosives, and he had been ordered to compensate her tens of thousands of dollars in overdue child support just days before her death. After discovering his mother's body, Morgan's son mentioned that his house key had gone missing during a recent visit to his father's house. Weidenfelder later admitted that she had found the missing key in the laundry at her house, which meant that she and Spaulding would have had access to Morgan's residence at the time of the murder. A closer look into the suspect's phones revealed a trove of evidence implicating Spaulding and Weidenfelder in the crime. The couple pointed the finger at each other, but investigators concluded that Spaulding likely masterminded the killing while Weidenfelder probably carried it out. They were both found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Number 20. Kyle Navin and Jennifer Valiente. When 56-year-old Jeffrey Navin and his wife, 55-year-old Jeanette, vanished in eastern Connecticut. In August of 2015, their friend initially hoped they had taken an impromptu vacation. Some speculated that the couple had purposely disappeared due to the severe financial problems they were experiencing at the time, but family members knew this was unlikely when they discovered untouched money in the Navins' bank account. Investigators soon narrowed their focus on Jeffrey and Jeanette's son, 27-year-old Kyle Navin, who reportedly gave a misleading alibi and statements to law enforcement. Following a raid of Kyle's Bridgeport home, he was detained on a federal weapons charge while remaining a suspect in his parents' disappearance. Nearly 3 months after the Navins went missing, their remains were found buried outside an abandoned house in neighboring Weston. Kyle was charged with his parents' murders, while his girlfriend, 31-year-old Jennifer Valiente, was charged with conspiracy and hindering prosecution. According to court documents, Jeanette and Jeffrey planned to sell their business and cut Kyle out of their will due to his financial irresponsibility and other problematic behavior. In addition to being connected to the double homicide through forensic evidence, phone records revealed that Kyle had sent Valiente a text message saying he had formulated a plan to get money for life. The couple fantasized about the ways they would spend their windfall, but they ended up going to prison instead. In 2017, Valiente pleaded guilty to her role in planning the murders and received an 8-year sentence. Kyle pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder the day before his trial was scheduled to begin in 2018 and was sentenced to 55 years in prison. Number 19. Jordan Hodge and Kenny Carlisle. 64-year-old Linda McAllister and her husband, 45-year-old William Chet Clemens, were just starting out as newlyweds, but the future they looked forward to was cruelly cut short. In July of 2017, when they vanished from their Conway, South Carolina home, a contractor found the couple's home in Desirae and their pickup truck missing from the driveway. The dogs were unfed and the pair hadn't been heard from in at least 5 days. McAllister's daughter, Dara Hodge, contacted her daughter, Jordan Hodge, who claimed that the missing couple had gone to Ohio to attend an emergency involving Clemens' family. Dara initially believed Jordan, but her suspicions were piqued when she visited her mother's home and saw that McAllister had not taken any of the belongings she would normally travel with. After learning that Clemens' family was not experiencing an emergency, she went to the police and an investigation was launched. McAllister had previously taken in Jordan and her boyfriend, Kenneth Carlisle, when they needed a place to live. Shortly before she and Clemens vanished, she discovered $5,000 of her money missing and kicked the couple out. Jordan's family disapproved of her relationship with Carlisle, but their attempts to persuade her to leave him proved futile. After McAllister and Clemens went missing, Jordan and Carlisle had gone buck wild, making large purchases with McAllister's credit cards, spending $11,000 in 3 days. 2 weeks after Jordan's grandparents disappeared, their bodies were found hidden in some brush not far from their home. They had both been shot in the head. During the fall of 2019, a jury found Jordan Hodge and Kenneth Carlisle guilty of both murders. They were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Number 18. Cynthia and Richie Wilder. Christopher Jackson had just finished working an overnight shift in December of 2015 when he arrived at his Minot, North Dakota home to find the back door kicked in. This only made him even more worried about his pregnant fiancée, 30-year-old Angela Wilder, who hadn't been answering her phone and was home alone with their infant son. On the floor next to the bed, he found Wilder's murdered body. She had been stabbed nearly 40 times. Angela had been dead for several hours by the time her body was discovered. Despite evidence of forced entry, there were no signs that the home had been ransacked, leading investigators to rule out the likelihood that Angela had been killed in a robbery gone wrong. Police almost immediately suspected the victim's ex-husband, Richie Wilder, of being involved in her murder. The former spouses had been entangled in a long-standing child custody dispute over their 2 children, who were staying at the home of Richie and his wife Cynthia on the night of the killing. A few days after the crime, Richie Wilder was charged with Angela's murder. He claimed that Jackson had killed Angela due to cheating suspicions, but surveillance footage from Jackson's job proved that this was a lie. Richie was found guilty in December of 2016 and is serving a life sentence without parole. More than 15 months after Angela's death, authorities arrested Cynthia Wilder for helping her husband plan the murder. She had implicated herself in conversations with a friend, during which she bragged about how proud she was of Richie for eliminating Angela from the picture. Cynthia entered an offered plea to conspiracy to commit murder and was sentenced to life without parole. Number 17. Nancy and William Trey Styler. 66-year-old retired anesthesiologist William Trey Styler and his wife Nancy initially seemed like ideal candidates for renting Colorado ski resort heiress Nancy Pfister's Aspen home. But they became entangled in a dispute with 57-year-old Pfister, who accused the couple of failing to pay the $4,000 monthly rent and even returned to the US early from a trip to Australia to deal with the matter. In February of 2014, Pfister's bound and bludgeoned body was found hidden in her bedroom closet. Police initially suspected both Trey and Nancy of participating in the murder, but Nancy was cleared of charges after Trey confessed to beating Pfister to death with a hammer. Suspicions of her possible involvement linger to this day, especially due to her husband's ailing health and mobility challenges, but she adamantly maintains that she had no involvement in the crime. Trey Styler pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in June of 2014 and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He died behind bars in August of 2015, barely a year into his term. Number 16. Kaylee Fryer and Jay Childs. In May of 2010, police received an early morning call about a gruesome crime scene at a Guthrie, Oklahoma residence. 50-year-old Louis Fryer had been stabbed to death in his bedroom with one of his own kitchen knives. His teenage daughter Kaylee had placed the 911 call in a seemingly frantic state, mentioning that her father's truck was missing and that there was blood everywhere. She later explained that she had discovered her dad's body after sleeping soundly through the night, although it was hard to understand how someone could sleep through such a bloody crime. Kaylee's friends told police that she had stopped going to school, was drinking and using drugs, and had a secret older boyfriend who her father would have never approved of. 3 days before he was killed, Louis discovered his daughter's relationship with 21-year-old Jay Childs and was furious. Childs eventually admitted to police that Kaylee had repeatedly asked him to kill Louis because she was sick of following his rules. By killing her father, she believed she would be able to move into her mother's home, where she believed she'd have more freedom. In her efforts to persuade Childs to murder Louis, Kaylee claimed she was pregnant and that they could never raise the child together as long as her dad was alive. The evidence would later reveal that she was not pregnant and that she was simply trying to manipulate Childs into doing her dirty work. Childs pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole in exchange for his willingness to testify against Kaylee, who was convicted of the same charge and also sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Number 15. Katie Robinson and Ronnie Wellborn. After prevailing through life-threatening illnesses, depression, a divorce, and other challenging circumstances, 46-year-old Kelly Underwood was stabbed and shot to death in her Princeton, Texas home due to a love triangle gone wrong. 2 months later, authorities announced the arrests of 45-year-old Ronnie Wellborn, 28-year-old Katie Robinson, 35-year-old Robert Veal, and 38-year-old Delvin Powell for their alleged roles in the crime. Underwood had been in a tumultuous on and off romantic relationship with her boss, Wellborn, who had started dating Robinson by the time of the murder. By the time she was killed, Underwood had vowed to move on from the situation, but Robinson clung to her hatred of Underwood and was furious that she continued to work for Wellborn. Suspect Robert Veal admitted to being with Underwood on the day she was last seen alive, but denied killing her, while Delvin Powell was connected to the murder through the detective work of Underwood's teenage daughter, who learned that he had been seen at her mother's house that day. All 4 suspects were originally charged with capital murder. Veal and Powell were found guilty as charged and sentenced to life without parole, while Wellborn and Robinson pleaded guilty to murder. Wellborn will be 75 when he becomes eligible for parole in 2047, and Robinson will become eligible for parole in 2032 at the age of 43. Number 14. Brooklyn Reynolds and Christopher Evans. Kentucky couple Henry and Chara Bryant were mercilessly gunned down in June of 2017 at their Mount Vernon home, where they lived with their children as a blended family after several failed relationships with other people. The couple's teenage daughter, Brooklyn Reynolds, told police that she had woken up to find the carnage. In addition to being covered with blood, the scene was littered with broken glass from the Bryants' shattered sliding glass door. Police were quick to notice that the door had been smashed from the outside and that there were no genuine signs of forced entry. There was also no evidence of a robbery, and none of the children recalled hearing any gunshots or a struggle. Investigators soon learned that Reynolds' relationship with her mother and stepfather had recently become strained due to their disapproval of her 22-year-old boyfriend, Christopher Evans. The Bryans had discovered Evans's real age and some other alarming details about the relationship while going through Reynolds' phone. Reynolds broke up with Evans at her parents' urging but continued to secretly talk to him behind their back. Evans claimed that he had remained friendly with Reynolds' family after the breakup, but this was untrue, according to the teen's siblings. As evidence began to mount, Evans confessed to killing the Bryans, claiming that they were abusive toward Reynolds and that he was trying to protect her. Authorities charged them both, and in 2019, Reynolds was sentenced to 23 years in prison for complicity to commit murder. Evans pleaded guilty to burglary and 2 counts of murder and was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Number 13. Jeffrey Munt and Joey Banis. By day, Jeffrey Munt was a top-ranking official at Northwestern University in Illinois. Outside of work, he lived a hedonistic lifestyle, often indulging in methamphetamine and violent intimacy. In 2007, he abruptly left Illinois and moved to Louisville, Kentucky, where he moved in with his 38-year-old boyfriend, Joey Banis. In June of 2010, police responded to a domestic incident at the home. Hoping to avoid getting locked up, Munt and Banis both offered to provide information about a murder in exchange for a get-out-of-jail-free card. Buried beneath the basement floor was a large plastic bin containing the body of Jamie Carroll, who had been shot and stabbed during a wild weekend at the house 6 months earlier. Munt and Banis blamed each other for Carroll's murder and were both charged with the crime. In March of 2013, Banis took a plea deal and was convicted of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. During Munt's trial, later that year, his high-flying defense attorney managed to persuade the jury that he had been cajoled into helping Banis bury Carroll's body and that he was not the actual killer. The jury acquitted Munt of the murder charge but found him guilty of robbery and tampering with evidence. He was released from prison the following year. Number 12. Chelsea Griffin and Alex Turner. 52-year-old Carrie Daly Turner and her husband, 61-year-old Stephen Gray Turner, were shot dead in cold blood inside a Myrtle Beach, South Carolina hotel room in March of 2015. The couple had plans to sell their businesses and live on the beach and had recently moved due to a fire that had extensively damaged their home. Several days after the killings, authorities announced the arrest of the Turner's son, 23-year-old Alexander Gray Turner, and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Chelsea Lelia Griffin, in connection with the crime. Turner had met Griffin just weeks earlier when she was working as a bartender at a local gentleman's club. He somehow convinced her that he was a paid assassin for the U.S. Department of Defense and that his commander had killed his parents when he tried to quit his line of work. Believing every single word Turner said, Griffin helped Turner hide the bodies under a mattress in the hotel room. She ended up taking an Alford plea to being an accessory after the fact to murder and served 18 months. Turner pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and was sentenced to 47 years in prison. Number 11. Brittany Overton and Justin Blake. A night of drinking, drugs and crime among friends in Martinsville, Indiana, went terribly wrong in September of 2019 when 18-year-old Justin Blake fatally shot his friend, 23-year-old Alex Jackson. Several days later, Jackson's heavily decomposed body was found in a ditch. The shooting was witnessed by Blake's girlfriend, Brittany Overton, but she initially told police that Jackson was alive and well the last time she saw him, and that he dropped her off at her home while on his way to meet a Grindr date. Nearly 2 months after Jackson's murder, Blake confessed the crime to his grandmother, who passed the information on to law enforcement. It was clear to anyone who knew Blake and Overton that they were extremely close, and even in the absence of a confession from Overton, she was connected to the crime through DNA evidence, internet activity, and cell phone activity. She eventually admitted that she and Blake had set Jackson up for a robbery using a fake Grindr profile. Overton took a plea deal in 2022 and was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while Blake was found guilty at trial and sentenced to 61 years behind bars. Number 10. Michael Montgomery Jr. and Jessica Lynn Long. On the evening of June 27, 2023, sheriff's deputies responded to the scene of a dead body along a Marion County, Florida roadside, where they found the remains of 40-year-old Wayne Barlow. He had been shot and bludgeoned in the head as well as strangled. The following day, deputies learned that someone was seen driving around in Barlow's car. They attempted to pull the vehicle over but were unsuccessful and later found it abandoned. While performing a foot search near the car, they found 47-year-old Michael Montgomery Jr. hiding in the water and 37-year-old Jessica Lynn Long hiding in a tree nearby. Investigators learned through interviews that Montgomery and Long had planned to steal Barlow's vehicle but had killed him when the carjacking didn't go as smoothly as planned. The victim put up a fight and Montgomery unsuccessfully attempted to run him over with his own car, but was unsuccessful. He also beat Barlow with a pipe and eventually resorted to shooting him. Montgomery and Long were charged with murder while committing a robbery and remain in custody at the Marion County Jail amid their ongoing cases. Number 9. Patricia Sexton and Michael Fielding. Bobby Sexton of Jacksonville, Texas was married with children when he began having an affair with a much younger woman named Patricia. He divorced his wife after Patricia became pregnant with their child in 1991, and the two eventually tied the knot. In February of 1998, Bobby disappeared without a trace. Patricia reported him missing to the Cherokee County Sheriff's Department, and his blood-covered SUV was found abandoned along a roadside 2 days later. About a month later, Bobby's body was found in a swampy part of neighboring Anderson County. He had been shot in the chest, but police seemed no closer to identifying the killer than they had been on day one. The investigation gained momentum after a tipster suggested looking into 29-year-old Michael Fielding, who worked for Patricia's family at their junkyard. As it turned out, the caller was Fielding's mother, whose suspicions about Bobby's disappearance only intensified after her son blew up at her for asking about the situation. The month after Bobby's murder, Fielding was arrested for driving under the influence. Police took the opportunity to bring up the murder, and Fielding confessed to shooting Bobby in a premeditated fashion. He was having an affair with Patricia, who saw killing Bobby as a way to guarantee she'd retain custody of their children. Authorities charged Fielding and Patricia with Bobby's murder. Patricia pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life without parole, while Fielding plea bargained after a key witness in his case passed away and was sentenced to 35 years. Number 8. Eileen Lazar and Francis Riccio. 71-year-old Maureen Riccio was murdered and dismembered at her Melbourne, Florida home by her own son. In September of 2013, authorities learned of her death after a worker discovered her mutilated remains in a swamp in Mico. Using tools and cleaning supplies he had purchased at a local store, Maureen's son, 45-year-old Francis Riccio, had placed her body in trash bags and dumped them in a place where he may have thought no one would find them. Following the discovery of Maureen's remains, Francis was arrested in Brooklyn, New York, on charges of murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. His girlfriend and the mother of his 3 children, 40-year-old Eileen Renee Lazar, was charged with accessory after the fact to first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. Riccio eventually admitted to bludgeoning his mother to death with a hammer during a heated argument. Lazar was in a different room when the killing happened and was unaware that the fight had gone that far, but she helped Riccio dispose of Maureen's body. She later claimed that she felt like she had no choice but to help, or she would lose access to her kids. Riccio was sentenced to 25 years for murder and will be released in 2036 at the age of 69. Lazar took a plea deal and admitted to accessory after the fact. She served 4 years in prison and was released in 2017. Number 7. Jonah Poole and Kylie Dakes. On Saturday, May 24th, 2025, emergency personnel responded to a call about a truck on fire outside a small garden store in Davidsonville. In the back seat of the vehicle, they found the deceased body of the store's owner, 67-year-old Edward Stephen Koza. His hands and legs were bound and there was tape over his mouth. He had been bludgeoned in the head, and investigators discovered evidence that gasoline had been used as an accelerant in the fire. Koza's store was in disarray, indicating that a struggle had occurred. One of the most valuable pieces of evidence was a seemingly brand new Bass Pro Shops baseball cap that was found on the ground outside. It appeared to be the same hat that one of the suspects was seen wearing in surveillance footage, which showed a young couple riding around in Koza's truck. The pair were later identified as 18-year-olds Jonah Poole and Kylie Dakes. Police believe they had already killed Koza and had hidden his body in the back seat while they drove around and bought the gas that they used to set it on fire with. Poole and Dakes were also seen entering a Bass Pro shop and buying some flannel shirts and a hat. The high school seniors have been charged with first and second degree murder, first and second degree assault, conspiracy to commit first and second degree murder, and arson. A law enforcement spokesperson said that the suspect's motive is currently unknown and that they're currently working to get to the bottom of the case. Number 6. Christina and Joseph Schroer. In September of 2024, police in Rose Hill, Kansas, responded to a call about a distressed individual. While there, they learned about a possible homicide and began investigating. The next day, officers discovered the buried remains of a child who they believed may have died several years earlier. The remains were identified as Kennedy Schroer, the adopted daughter of 50-year-old Christina and 53-year-old Joseph Schroer. Investigators believe she was strangled to death in 2020 and have ruled the case a homicide. Authorities are releasing very few details about how they learned about Kennedy's body or any other circumstances surrounding the case. Joseph Schroer is facing charges of 4 counts of child abuse or torture, interference with law enforcement, felony theft, Medicaid fraud, and liability for crimes of another. Christina Schroer is charged with first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, 4 counts of child abuse or torture, felony theft, 4 counts of forgery, Medicaid fraud, and desecration of a corpse. Number 5. Kimberly and Lenoris Williams. As a spiritual healer and faith counselor, Georgia Green devoted her life to helping others, but when she failed to help one couple, they tried to kill her by setting her house on fire. In April of 2017, she narrowly escaped the blaze and had been stabbed nearly 30 times. Green was in critical condition, unable to talk, and suffered from multiple strokes while hospitalized for her injuries. A witness who had been working on the property earlier that day told police that a man named Lenoris Williams had approached and said that Green's house was on fire. Police tracked down Williams and his wife Kimberly less than an hour later and brought them in for questioning. The couple initially tried to pin the stabbing and arson on a strange man who they claimed they had seen at Green's house. 33-year-old Lenoris and 36-year-old Kimberly had started seeking Green's help when financial problems and other issues began taking a toll on their once happy marriage. They believed that Lenoris's bad luck in life was being caused by a hex his ex-girlfriend had placed on him. Kimberly initially tried to separate herself from the attack on Green, as if Lenoris must have assaulted the victim on his own accord, but police found disturbingly hateful writings about Green inside Kimberly's purse, making it hard to believe that she was completely uninvolved in the crime. After waking up at the hospital and regaining her ability to communicate, Green implicated both Lenoris and Kimberly in the attack. Kimberly Williams took a plea deal and was sentenced to 35 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation, while Lenoris is serving a 30-year sentence to be followed by 10 years of probation. Number 4. Matthew Amaro and Tiffany Medina. 44-year-old Paterson, New Jersey resident Twahi Howard was shot multiple times at around 9 p.m. on the evening of June 2, 2024. He was pronounced dead at the scene, and the alleged shooters, 27-year-old Matthew Amaro and 26-year-old Tiffany Medina, are both facing serious charges. Police identified the suspects with help from Amaro's father, who confirmed that his son and Medina were the people seen in several surveillance images from the crime. Amaro is charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, unlawful possession of a handgun for an unlawful purpose, and possession of a controlled, dangerous substance. Medina is charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and possession of a controlled substance. Authorities have yet to identify an alleged motive or go into detail about the circumstances surrounding the shooting, which marked Patterson's 5th homicide of 2025. Number 3. Zavariana Cook and Hunter Karlstrom. Known to his friends and family as Caveman, 61-year-old James Sartorelli was found murdered in his Smithville, Arkansas home in May of 2020. He had been shot in the head. The discovery was made after he failed to show up at the cattle ranch where he worked for 2 days straight, causing concern among his co-workers. Sartorelli's home showed no signs of forced entry or a struggle, but his gun and coin collections were missing from the residence. He also kept a large amount of money in his possession at all times because he didn't have a bank account, and his friends had worried in the past that someone was going to target him for it. State police received a valuable tip from an informant who had received a text message identifying Sartorelli's alleged killer as 33-year-old Hunter Karlstrom. The conversation also revealed that Sartorelli and Karlstrom had recently had a dispute after Karlstrom crashed the truck that Sartorelli had let him borrow. By the time Karlstrom was identified as a suspect, he had gone on the run with his fiancée, 23-year-old Zavariana Cook, using cell phone location data. Police traced the pair to Oxford, Mississippi. Cook immediately surrendered to officers, but Karlstrom refused to follow orders and shot at law enforcement, who returned fire and killed him at the scene. Cook pleaded guilty to several charges relating to the case and was sentenced to 84 months in prison. She'll be released in 2027 at 31 years old. Today's topic was requested by Envy1416. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Kyle and Shanice Burton. At around 11 p.m. on August 29th, 2024, police responded to a disturbance at a Harrisburg, Pennsylvania apartment where they found 26-year-old Allie McFadden dead. According to court documents, 42-year-old Kyle Burton had assaulted McFadden, while 36-year-old Shanice Burton held her at gunpoint. Speaking anonymously with local station WGAL, a neighbor said they had seen McFadden being beaten through a window. Those who knew McFadden described her as polite, quiet, smart, kind, funny, and always in a good mood. But she had not been very active on social media in recent years, leaving much of her life a mystery. Kyle and Shanice Burton were charged with criminal homicide, conspiracy to commit homicide, aggravated assault, and conspiracy to commit aggravated assault. They remain held without bail as the case continues. Number 1. Matthew and Teresa DeYoung. While responding to a reported shooting in Newton County, Indiana, at 1 o'clock in the morning in May of 2025, police found 37-year-old Dennis Grieder suffering from gunshot wounds. He was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead, and a thorough investigation ensued. Based on the findings, authorities arrested 40-year-old Matthew DeYoung and his wife, 35-year-old Teresa DeYoung. Matthew was charged with murder, criminal recklessness, obstruction of justice, and neglect of a dependent. Teresa was charged with criminal recklessness, obstruction of justice, neglect of a dependent, and false informant. The couple was booked into the Newton County Jail. In the meantime, police have declined to release specific details regarding what led up to the shooting. Thanks for watching. Imagine you're offered a deal, 5 years in prison in exchange for a guaranteed future with your perfect match. Do you take it? Let us know in the comment section below.